In November 1934, almost a year after the Polikarpov I-16's successful test flight, Russian dictator Joseph Stalin watched a demonstration of the plane's maneuverability at Korinka Field near Moscow. Impressed with what he saw, Stalin commanded the Soviet Air Force to put together an aerobatic team. Zavod 39, a state-owned aircraft factory, built 5 I-16s that were specially lightened and equipped with engines that powered the aircraft to speeds of 250 miles per hour. The planes, painted red with black cowling around the engine, became known as Stalin's Red 5. They were flown at air shows in Russia, at the 1935 Milan International Air Show, and before French Minister M. Lavelle, who was so impressed that he started his own aerobatic squad. Flying the Polikarpov I-16 was difficult. The Red 5 made it look easy. Nikolai Polikarpov, known as the King of Fighters due to the number of planes he designed, had been arrested, along with many of his peers, during one of Stalin's infamous purges. When the Russian secret police decided to do something with all the talent wasting away in their cells, Polikarpov was moved to a different prison and eventually an airplane hangar where he worked on new designs. Draft work on fighter planes led to his freedom. Polikarpov's blueprints for his I-16 were kept simple so that untrained factory workers could build it. Russians called the I-16 Ishak, which means little donkey. Words like blunt nose, stocky-barreled, stumpy, and pugnacious were also used to describe the 20-foot-long fighter plane. The word revolutionary also applied. When the Polikarpov I-16 entered service in 1935, it set the record at 224 miles per hour as the fastest fighter plane in the world. It surpassed all other monoplane fighters in design and unique features and achieved a number of firsts in monoplane fighter history. Cantilever wings with retractable landing gear, enclosed cockpit, variable pitch propellers, and RS-82 unguided rocket launchers. The plane's retractable landing gear caused Russian pilots to excel in multitasking. The plane's wheels were hidden in wells located between the spars of the center section. During landing, the pilot had to control the plane while turning a hand crank on the right-hand side of the cockpit 44 times to open the undercarriage. The handle looked so much like that of a barrel organ that the Russian named it after the instrument, Sharmanka. During its first 2 years of operation, the I-16 remained obscure to most of the world. The outbreak of the Spanish Civil War in July 1936 changed all that. When General Francisco Franco's nationalists challenged the Spanish government's Republican forces, Italy, Germany, and the Soviet Union quickly took sides. Mussolini and Hitler supported Franco. The Germans sent as many as 10,000 pilots and technicians. Stalin, on the other hand, demanded gold for his commitment, paid in advance. A Soviet shipload of 31 I-16 Type 5s arrived in October, along with communist pilots known as the International Brigade. By November, the I-16's defense of Madrid had successfully delayed Franco's advance on that city and stopped German junkers from dropping bombs during daylight. The Republicans called the I-16s Mosca, fly, while the nationalists derided the I-16 as Rata, rat. When a limited number of I-16 Type 10s ended up with Wright Cyclone engines, smuggled out of the United States, the planes flew so fast they were called Super Moscas. Planes were altered for battle as needed. The I-16's landing wheels were too narrow for the bumpy airfields, so the wheels were made wider. When machine guns froze at high altitudes, the Russians created a piece of equipment that enabled hot engine exhaust gases to flow over the guns. A plane's capabilities dictated its combat tactics. Moscas capitalized on their outstanding speed of climb to attack enemy aircraft from above or below, a strategy so successful that the Republicans lost only 2 planes in 14 weeks. Nationalist pilots were told not to attack I-16s unless they had superior numbers. This led to air battles involving as many as 200 planes. In late 1937, Soviet air superiority began to wane. German pilots were using tactics that had been employed earlier by the I-16s, and planes assisting in the ground war were easily shot down. In November 1938, the last Mosca left Spain. In the late 1930s, a long-standing animosity between Russia and Japan flared up. Polikarpov I-16 fighters took to the sky. The Soviets supplied 250 I-16s to the Chinese to aid their defense against the invasion by Japan. The Japanese called the I-16 Abu, which means gadfly, an irritating little insect. As skirmishes continued, the little insect turned into a powerful pest. By late 1939, the Soviet Air Force had strategically countered the Japanese attack on the Russian-controlled Mongolian border along the Khalkhin-Gol River. This victory took only 5 months, and it taught Stalin a lesson that he used 2 years later against Germany in World War II. Most historians claim the Polikarpov I-16 was obsolete by June 1941, when Germany invaded the USSR's Western Front and ignited what the Russians called the Great Patriotic War. Pilots who flew the I-16 back then remember the little donkey quite differently. At the time of the German incursion, codename Operation Barbarossa, the Soviets' main frontline fighter was the Polikarpov I-16. Its compact snub-nosed body was well suited for a ramming maneuver known as Taran. Rugged construction made it possible for the I-16 to strike enemy planes, yet allow the Russian pilot to bail out if necessary. On the first day of the Great Patriotic War, 15 Soviet pilots were known to have rammed enemy aircraft. The pilots were honored as heroes of the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, only a few had survived to receive their medals. During the war, the Polikarpov I-16 was deployed on all fronts, from the Arctic to the Baltic Sea. In July 1941, Germany began positioning aircraft to bomb Moscow. The I-16s, which made up most of the Soviet Defense Force 6th Fighter Corps, intercepted the Nazis before they reached the capital city. The planes were also used by the Soviet Navy's 13th Fighter Aviation Regiment of the Baltic Fleet to guard ships and military posts on the Hanko Peninsula in the Gulf of Finland. The regiment later defended supply lines that moved food and other goods to Leningrad during Germany's 2.5-year blockade of that city. The route became known as the Road of Life. In March 1942, the regiment was given a new designation, the 4th Guard Fighter Aviation Regiment. In the first month after its promotion, the 4th Guard shot down 54 Nazi aircraft while losing only 2 I-16s. No wonder the 4th Guard was one of the last military units to deploy the I-16. Between 1935 and 1942, Polikarpov's monoplane changed Russia's image as a backward nation. Factories churned out more than 10,000 I-16s. Yet today, almost all of them have vanished. The ZK-JIP-45 on display is one of 6 airworthy Polikarpov I-16s in the world. Recovery expeditions and restorations were funded by Sir Tim Wallace. It is believed that this plane was manufactured in 1939 for the Leningrad Fighter Squadron of the Baltic Fleet Air Force, which defended Leningrad during Germany's 2.5-year blockade of that city. The plane's journey from Russia to the United States began when it was found in a frozen grave north of St. Petersburg. Remnants of 5 other I-16s and 3 Polikarpov I-153s were found farther north in Karelia. In October 1992, salvage from the I-16s was transported to the Aeronautical Research Bureau and plant in Siberia, where more than 1,300 of the original I-16s were produced. Much of Polikarpov's design data and manuals had been preserved. Russian aeronautical experts, following Polikarpov's original specifications, combined original components from the wreckage with replacement parts they either built or bought from other factories. Each plane's history was researched. Markings and color schemes were faithfully reproduced. Wallace and his chief engineer Ray Mulqueen discovered that engines almost identical to those used in I-16 Type 24s and I-153s were being used in Russians' Antonov An-2 biplanes. When installed in the 20-foot-long fighters, they produced remarkable speed. The first successful test flight of the restored I-16 took place September 9, 1995. Over the next 3 years, the factory restored 6 Polikarpov I-16s and 3 I-153s. As the Russians approved each aircraft, its parts were disassembled, crated, and transported from Siberia to New Zealand. After 70 years, Polikarpov's I-16 had gone full circle. Pilots who tested the restored I-16 Type 24s responded favorably. They reported that the fighter was remarkably stable and easy to control, contrary to criticism leveled at it throughout the years. They were impressed with the fighter's performance and agility. The plane's reputation as a pugnacious little donkey still applied.